My name is Eliza Hart, and if you had met me a year ago, you would have seen a soft-spoken girl who believed in fairness, hard work, and the goodness of people. I was the kind who smiled too much, apologized too quickly, and trusted far too easily. I genuinely believed that if you poured your heart into something, the world would give you a chance. I was wrong, and because of that, I became something else, something sharper, something stronger, something unbreakable. Before everything happened, I lived quietly in London, in a small brick apartment with too many indoor plants and a balcony that looked out over the Thames. I loved mornings, strong tea, sunlight, gentle silence. I loved walking to work, watching the city wake up, people rushing, life happening around me. I used to admire everything. I used to dream. I used to think kindness was strength. But now, when I stand in front of the mirror, I see a different woman. A woman who learned that silence is a weapon, that patience cuts deeper than anger, and that revenge, slow, steady revenge, is the coldest and cleanest justice. This is the story of how I was humiliated publicly, how 5 minutes changed my fate, and how I destroyed a man who believed he was untouchable. The day everything changed, I had spent 3 weeks preparing for the biggest presentation of my career. I worked late nights, skipped weekends, ignored exhaustion, and poured every bit of my knowledge into those slides. It was for a potential merger with Avery & Sons, one of the most prestigious companies in the United States. Their CEO, Jonathan Avery, was visiting London, and our company, Hastings Global Consulting, was desperate to impress him. The morning of the presentation, I felt confident. My blazer was crisp, my hair perfectly tied, and my heart pounding with excitement. It wasn't fear, it was hope. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to stand out. I wanted to show that the girl who once doubted everything about herself could shine in a room full of powerful men. The conference room was polished and intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the city. I entered with my laptop, my notes, and a smile that could have lit up the room. Jonathan greeted me politely, his voice calm and deep. There were a few investors, analysts, and senior partners present. And then there was Richard Hastings, my CEO. A tall, blonde, arrogant man with a smile full of self-importance and eyes that moved like they owned everything they saw. He had always been dismissive toward me, but nothing prepared me for what he was about to do. I had barely begun speaking, barely 5 minutes into presenting, when he interrupted me. "Amelia," he said loudly, waving a hand as if shooing away an insect. "Enough. Please sit down. You clearly aren't prepared for this. I'll handle it." My heart stopped. Jonathan looked confused. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. The room fell silent. I whispered, "But, I haven't even." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Inexperience shows quickly," he said with a smirk. "Don't worry, she's learning." Heat rushed to my face. I felt every eye turn to me. I felt humiliation burn through my skin like acid. I felt small, foolish, worthless. But I sat down, quietly, slowly, like a wounded animal crawling back into its cage. Richard continued the presentation using my slides, my work, without giving me a shred of credit. He mispronounced terms, skipped over important points, and twisted data to sound smarter. It was painful to watch. Jonathan noticed. I could see it in his frown, the way he squinted at the screen, the way he observed Richard stumble through information he clearly didn't understand. When the presentation ended, the investors looked dissatisfied. Jonathan shook Richard's hand but didn't smile. And I walked out of the room feeling like the floor beneath me had collapsed. That night, as I lay awake staring at my ceiling, something inside me shifted. Humiliation is a strange thing, it either breaks you or rebuilds you. That day, I decided I would never let anyone make me feel small again. And I promised myself something else. Richard Hastings will pay. Slowly, deeply, completely. The quiet beginning of. People think revenge starts with anger. Mine started with silence. The next morning at work, I entered the office as though nothing had happened. No tears, no complaints, no tremble in my voice. But something was different. My eyes had new clarity. My heartbeat had new rhythm. My mind had new purpose. I watched. I listened. I observed. One thing was clear. Richard was careless. A man who is too sure of himself always leaves open cracks. And I intended to find them. He dismissed my existence for months. He belittled me in meetings, cut off my ideas, and took credit for my work whenever he could. But every insult he threw at me was fuel. Every slight was a spark. I worked silently, efficiently, methodically, and in the background, I studied him. I learned everything: who he trusted, who he despised, his weaknesses, his habits, his lies. Richard loved power. He loved attention. He loved being admired. But most of all, he loved shortcuts. And shortcuts leave evidence. The discovery that changed everything. It happened on a rainy Tuesday night. I was working late, the entire office empty except for the cleaning staff. I stepped into the executive floor to pick up some printouts, and on Richard's desk, a folder sat open, full of numbers that didn't add up. My heart raced as I scanned through the financial records. I wasn't a senior analyst for nothing. I knew when numbers were manipulated. And these numbers weren't just manipulated, they were dangerous. If discovered, they could ruin him. Maybe even destroy Hastings Global entirely. This was it. The weapon. The knife. The weakness I needed. I didn't steal anything. I didn't hack anything. I simply observed and noted inconsistencies. Legally, carefully, silently, I spent weeks building a case stronger than steel. Every document, every slip-up, every unauthorized signature, everything built a perfect trail. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed influence. I needed someone powerful on my side. And that's when I turned to Jonathan Avery. Gaining the ally I needed. Jonathan was a calm, intelligent man, the opposite of Richard. He had dignity, manners, and a sharp eye. I noticed during each follow-up meeting that he watched me more than the others. Not in a romantic way, but in a curious, analytical way. One afternoon, he called me into a private meeting. "Amelia," he said, "for someone who was introduced as inexperienced, you seem awfully competent." I blinked. "I try my best." "You don't have to be modest," he replied. Something was wrong with that presentation Richard gave. I could tell the work wasn't his. That was my moment. But revenge is never rushed. So instead of complaining, or exposing Richard prematurely, I simply said, "Sometimes effort goes unseen." Jonathan's gaze sharpened, as though he understood something unspoken. Day after day, he began asking for my input. My reports. My observations. Slowly, deliberately, I became a trusted voice in his evaluation of the merger. I didn't sabotage Richard. I didn't lie. I simply performed well, better than anyone else. And Jonathan noticed. The more competent I appeared, the more incompetent Richard looked in comparison. My revenge was already blooming. 6 months passed. My evidence was complete. Jonathan trusted me. Richard underestimated me. The board had begun noticing the cracks in his leadership. Everything was ready. One night, in my apartment, with London glowing outside my window, I wrote the email that would unravel Richard Hastings' empire. No emotion, no anger, just facts. I sent the entire evidence folder, clean, organized, legally airtight, to the board of directors, to Jonathan, and to the internal auditing team. Then I closed my laptop and waited. I slept better that night than I had in a year. The fall of Richard Hastings. The next morning, I walked into the office like any other day. People whispered. Phones rang endlessly. Doors slammed. Richard stormed past me, face pale, eyes furious. But I kept walking, calm, graceful, untouchable. By noon, the entire office had heard. Richard was under investigation. His accounts were suspended. By evening, he was escorted out of the building. Publicly. Humiliated. Exactly the way he humiliated me. He looked at me once as he walked out. Eyes wide, disbelief painted across his face. He finally realized the truth. I wasn't weak. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't quiet because I was scared. I was quiet because I was. 3 weeks later, the board organized a meeting. I was nervous but composed. Jonathan was present too. He smiled at me, a genuine warm smile, and said, Amelia, Hastings Global would have collapsed if not for you. My chest tightened. We need someone capable, someone sharp, someone trustworthy. He paused. We would like you to accept a senior position, head of strategic analysis. My breath hitched. Me, the girl who was humiliated. The girl who was dismissed. I accepted the offer with steady hands. And as I walked out of the boardroom that day, I realized something powerful. I didn't just take revenge. I rebuilt myself. I became stronger. I rose higher than the man who tried to break me. And that, more than anything else, was the victory I always deserved. Sometimes I stand in front of the mirror, remembering the girl I used to be. Soft, hopeful, naive. The girl who was belittled in front of a room full of powerful men. The girl whose confidence was ripped apart in just 5 minutes. But now, when I look at myself, I smile, not softly, but proudly. Because those 5 minutes that destroyed me were the same 5 minutes that built the woman I am today. Strong, fearless, unshakable. My name is Amelia Hart, and I do not break. I rise.